Hi, my name is Sarah Burman, and I'm doing my facilitation on the article by Todd Gabe, Richard Florida, and Charlotta Melander, The Creative Class and the Crisis for Session 3. Some historical context behind this article. It involves the Great Recession of 2008. What is a recession? It's a decline in per capita world gross domestic product. During this time in the United States, the GDP declined by 4.3%. The Dow fell over 6,000 points, and it was the longest economic decline since the Great Depression in the 1930s. The net worth of American households and nonprofits dropped from $69 trillion to $55 trillion, which was a change rate of 14 trillion. Housing prices began to fall in 2006, and then they just kept declining until they entered a crash state. And the banks were letting people take out too much money in loans and were not getting that money back fast enough. So this article deals with high unemployment rates. But it's important to remember that this does not factor in the people who gave up looking and didn't claim unemployment, and also that long-term unemployment existed, which is when someone is employed for 27 weeks or longer, and at this time it was 4.4%, which is the highest ever recorded. The unemployment rate rose to about 8.4 million people, which was about 5%. And towards the end of the recession, unemployment was up to 9.5%. U6 unemployment was 17%, and U6 unemployment is marginally employed workers and part-time employees. The creative class fared much better than the working and service classes, which we'll get into in a second. And then there are many factors that go into unemployment rates. There's a probability equation that I did not include in this PowerPoint, but is in the article that factors in the probability of unemployment based on your occupational class and certain demographics, as well as your regional status and stuff like that. So the creative class did fare better in economic downturn. Now, what is the creative class? So the different occupational categories are listed here. They involve everything from computer and maths and sciences to education to healthcare to high-end sales and business management. The employees in the creative class are much harder to replace because they have less standardized work, and they have a skill set that sometimes is important and only used within specific people that is much harder to attain than other occupations, such as the working and service occupations where they just follow templates. These creative and the people in the creative class are problem solvers and thinkers. Instead of just following a template, they're coming up with certain ideas. The most affected during the recession were construction workers and the service industry for restaurants and retail. A lot of this was, or most of this was because the housing market crashed, so they weren't building more housing developments. So the construction workers were out of jobs, and then because they weren't building these housing developments, then they weren't expanding and adding in stores and restaurants near these new developments. So then the service industry and those retail and food industry jobs were not being created. These two tables discuss the college attainment rates by occupational class and then unemployment rates by college attainment status. So the top table, table 1, you can see that almost 63% of the creative class has a 4-year degree, whereas only 20% and 8% of the service and working classes respectively have a college degree. And then jumping down to table 3, the unemployment rates were much lower for the creative class, even if they didn't have a degree, than the rest of the working classes or the occupational classes. So this information suggests that having a college degree might help reduce the probability of unemployment during economic downturn. And I think that's something that's really interesting to look at and think about. Is that something that you necessarily agree with or disagree with, or think kind of just as a superfluous detail? Table 2 shows the unemployment rates by occupational class. Again, you can see the creative class before the recession had a much lower unemployment. And after the recession, even though that unemployment rose, they have much less unemployment than the rest of the occupational classes. This organizes unemployment rates by industry category. So the highest post-recession unemployment rates were related towards construction, management, arts and entertainment, recreation, hotel and food service industries. And the lowest were in education, utilities, healthcare, science and tech, and social assistance. And I think that's interesting too, because the lowest unemployment rates were the careers and occupations and industries that are most necessary towards human growth and development. Education, utilities, especially healthcare, science and tech development, and social assistance. So that leads to the question of, as educators, should we be pushing students to pursue creative class degrees and employment opportunities over other industries? Or what is the benefit, or is there a benefit of working in service class occupations? And I think that's something that I kind of struggle with too personally, because I come from obtaining a BA in theater, and that's almost an unnecessary degree, as much as I hate to say it but noting that the lowest unemployment rates are in certain categories over others, like, is there a benefit, or is there is it something we should be doing to push students towards having careers that could help them out if the economy does crash again in the future. So some of the conclusions from the article were that creative class had lower unemployment rates overall from start to finish. Having a creative occupation lowered your probability of being unemployed by 2%. And then a quote pulled from sort of the end of the article is, metropolitan areas with the lowest shares of creative workers have higher average unemployment rates than places with a greater percentage of the workforce in the creative class. So I think that's something that's interesting to look at too. In the beginning of the article, it's the authors state the impact of having wow, those quotes are all over the place. Sorry. The impact of having a creative occupation became more beneficial in the 2 years following the recession. These patterns, if they continue, are suggestive of the structural change in the U.S. economy, one that favors knowledge-based creative activities. So some questions I pose are, what could that structural change be? Are they going to be pushing more towards creative class opportunities and educational opportunities? What are some of those knowledge-based creative activities that would most benefit future populations? And then how can we best implement that in metropolitan and urban areas that would be more affected by economic downturn? So areas that have less percentage of creative class employees suffer the most, but how do we integrate creative class opportunities into those areas? So just some final food for thought. Some references, and that's it.